Hello everyone, welcome back to Dark Night Tales. Before we dive in, please show your support, give this video a like, and be sure to subscribe and click the bell icon so that you don't miss future videos. So let's get started. The first story. I lived in a haunted house for 11 years. Up until I was 11 years old, I lived in this house, which I fully believe was haunted to this day. I shared a bedroom with my older sister, and my two older brothers shared a room right across the hall. The way our rooms were set up was the top floor was more like an attic that just had a normal staircase, and there were two walls at the top for two doors, one to my room and one to my brother's, so it was very out of the way, which makes this that much more creepy. At night I would often have trouble sleeping, and I always felt watched. When I first moved into my room with my sister, since I slept in my parents' room until I was about 4, maybe 5, my bed was set up closest to the door, which was always open so I could see down the stairs. This terrified me. Later on, my bed was moved next to my sister's. I still always had trouble sleeping because I constantly felt watched. One night I was almost asleep, the TV was statusy but with no noise, so I only heard my breathing. Totally aware of my surroundings, I felt pressure on the foot of my bed, like it was being pushed down. I couldn't look, move, or breathe. I didn't want to see it. I didn't want to notice it. It went away and I went to bed. But things never got better. When I would use the bathroom in the middle of the night, like most people, I would run to and from the bathroom, but it wasn't irrational. I heard a noise. It sounded deep, low, demonic, aggressive. It was growling at me, and only then did I run up the stairs as fast as possible and start crying under my covers. When we moved out of this house, it still comes up often at the dinner table, just the house in general. We didn't live in a nice neighborhood. It was run by gangs 24/7, but one day my mom had mentioned that there was in fact a Ouija board in the house, and it happened to be located behind a wall panel in the back of my brother's closet. It was a panel that led to an even more attic-like area, and we would sometimes store stuff in there like board games. When my mom was cleaning this area out, I guess she found a Ouija board that sure did not belong to any of us. My family doesn't mess with Ouija boards, we especially never owned one. She says it probably belonged to my grandparents, and that's when my sister also spoke up that she had seen and felt things similar to me. She had seen a shadow figure at the foot of her bed as well, like the one I had seen at the bottom of the stairs, but she described it as a person. What I saw wasn't a person. This leads me to believe that there were multiple ghosts/demons in this house. Luckily, my new house is entirely normal, except for once when I had come home from a friend's house where I played with a Ouija board alone, and it worked. I saw a shadow man at the end of the hall going to my room from the bathroom across the hall, but I never saw it ever again afterwards and figured to never tell anybody since it was a one-time occurrence. I'm so glad we moved from that house, but I think I'll always be terrified from what I saw and heard, especially being growled at. Truly a skin-crawling and undeniable sound. The second story. My friends convinced me to go into an abandoned haunted house. It was a mistake. The moment I crossed the door's threshold and stepped onto the unstable wooden floor, I felt my bones quiver. My friends' laughter was like ribbons tying knots at my throat. "Come on, it's been abandoned for years," they teased, charging ahead into the living quarters of the old unstable house. I was surrounded by peeling wallpaper, molding floorboards, furniture dating from the 50s, and old newspaper articles were peppered across the entire property. It felt like walking into the heart of a grave. Everything slowly fading away, a memoriam to someone who'd once lived. Now it was nothing but a playground for the morbidly curious. I took another step in but remained close to the unhinged front door. I was cautious, but apparently not cautious enough to decline this invitation. Cassie and her fiery mane of red hair popped up beside me. I hadn't seen her coming, let alone heard her. Her presence made my body jolt to attention and my heart jump into my throat. "Don't be afraid, if there's a ghost it can't hurt you," she whispered, a playful glint in her eyes. Cassie's confidence was intoxicating, much like her personality. She was everything I aspired to be. The word hung in the air like a bad smell. Ghost. Of course that didn't exist. But the fact that she mentioned it made the hairs on my arms rise. I laughed nervously, as if the gesture alone would shake my nerves. That's when her fingers laced with mine. My eyes widened. I looked at her with surprise, but she smiled innocently and pulled me further into the house. The deeper I ventured, the thicker the air felt. I was being crushed beneath my fears and the musky smell of rotting wood. Cassie let go of my hand and turned her attention to a small trapdoor in the middle of the floor. "Girls," she called out, her voice laced with excitement. I wanted to turn away and run. I could see the exit out of the corner of my eye from here, yet somehow, I turned my attention to the trapdoor that was slowly being peeled open. A set of narrow stairs lead straight down into an ocean of darkness. My eyes could not form anything past them. I swallowed. "We should probably leave," I spoke, but my voice was too timid. It must have been because Cassie followed with, "I'll go down with my phone and see if I can find anything cool." Her smile was devilish, as if she enjoyed the taste of fear on my tongue. I wanted to interject, but by the time I swallowed, she was already halfway down. The others were giggling around the hatch, and I stood there, watching her small frame getting devoured by darkness. That's when I saw it. Eyes. Glistening golden eyes right behind her, in the corner, swimming in the dark. The only element of light piercing through the velvet black. "Cassie," I shrieked. The hatch closed. The girls jumped back, but I stumbled closer. "There's something in there," I begged, my fingers attempting to pull the hatch open frantically. The others were frozen, and for once, I was the only one breathing courage. "Who closed it?" one of them whispered. It closed on its own," the other's voice replied in a quiver. One of them laughed nervously, but all of that was background noise compared to the beating of my own heart. "Cassie, say something," I begged, banging on the hatch. The silence was deafening. There was nothing worse than silence. At least if she'd screamed, it would have confirmed something had happened. With silence, it leaves it up to your imagination. Why was the hatch not opening? Why was I drowning in Cassie's silence? I fell back in defeat. Sitting, my fingers raw from clawing at the wooden hatch, splintered and red. The hatch flies open and roaring laughter as sharp as a blade's edge spills out. My eyes widen in shock as Cassie's smile emerges from the pooling darkness. She's laughing. Howling even. "Got you guys," her words echo in my mind as I blankly stare at her face. I blink, shock washing off of me in waves. I had fallen back but picked myself up quickly. I was ready to run, the adrenaline rushing to my heart. In her arms, she cradled a small, yellow-eyed cat. I finally allowed myself to breathe. The moldy air rushed back into my lungs and my face heated up. I could imagine I was red with anger, red with embarrassment, red with shame. Had I really thought? I cleared the idea from my mind. Purged it. Another hour passed and we stepped out of the bus. I had yet to say a word. The others laughed so much they might have broken a rib. I, on the other hand, remained silent. The same silence Cassie had so gracefully offered me earlier. The girls had collected old books from the house, some of them had jewelry, and Cassie had a cat. We sat at the bus stop, waiting for a transfer to go to the animal shelter. We browsed through the photographs we'd taken from the house. I watched the screen flip between the pictures absent-mindedly. My heart still hadn't recovered. There was a picture of the living quarters, with the shredded cotton blinds, the damaged old chairs. Some of the girls were in the picture, and behind them, I noticed strings of blue light. With every new picture it looked different. There were golden and pale yellow hues entangled with them. I raised an eyebrow and leaned in. "What's that?" I asked as she swiped to another picture. In this one the lights looked like they formed the shape of a man sitting on one of the chairs. "Oh my God, that looks like a person," one of the girls exclaimed. I took the camera and quickly scanned the pictures. The next picture was of Cassie descending into the basement. The light formed a hand near the hatch. I quickly swiped again. The last picture was of Cassie in the basement before the hatch closed. I spotted the yellow eyes instantly. But what I hadn't seen until now was the smile forming in the other corner of the room. I looked up from the screen to Cassie. She looked at me and on her lips hung the same smile. The third story. I lived in a haunted house. Back when I was a child, my whole family had lived in the suburbs for like 20 years. The neighborhood was kinda creepy for me though. Drug dealers, gangs, prostitutes were everywhere. Never play with the kids next door, my mom used to tell me. I used to hate my parents for that because I had no friends, and I could only play alone or with my siblings. That's when we all started to notice what the heck was wrong with the house. I think it happened when I was 8. My sister and I were playing around in the bedroom. Sometimes we put the blankets on our shoulders to pretend we were some ancient Chinese men. That's when we saw a white blur flashing past the bedroom door. At first, we thought it was our older brother, Kevin. He always pranked us when there were no adults around. We looked everywhere for him, but he was nowhere to be found. We asked our mom if she had seen Kevin, but she told us that he was sent to a Buxaban, something like a Chinese learning center if you don't know, that morning and didn't return yet. We told her what we saw, but she thought it was just our imagination and ignored us. One day when my siblings and I were all at school, and my mom was alone in the house, she heard my voice calling her, and she responded out of habit. It didn't take long for her to realize what was happening, but she kept calm. There was nothing she could have done anyway. That night, she saw someone standing behind her in the mirror by the stairs. It was an old lady in a white dress according to her. Her eyes were bleeding. She kept calling me, but she didn't sound like an old lady. I heard voices of you coming out of her mouth, she told me. A few days later, my mom invited some sort of medium to the house. Wow, the medium said. I didn't expect so many spirits in one house. The medium suggested that we move immediately, but we stayed because we couldn't afford to move. A few years later, my grandparents got very sick, probably because of aging, and my mom was the only person who could take care of them. My dad wanted to help, but he had to work 2 jobs to support the whole family and pay the medical bills. Most of the time my parents were not home. They just left cash on the table every day so my siblings and I could get some food. Since we didn't have any friends back then, we usually stayed home right after school. One night when everyone else was asleep, I heard some noise coming from the living room. At first, I thought it was a burglar because it was a terrible neighborhood, but when I got to the living room with a baseball bat in my hands, there was no one but the TV on full volume. I turned it off, but it turned itself back on, so I just pulled the plug. It didn't turn itself back on again like horror movie plots, but everything else did. The lights, the AC, a piggy bank that plays music, literally everything electric started to make noises. I panicked. I tried to wake up my brother and my sister, but they just didn't wake up. I even slapped them in the face, but they just didn't wake up. I dashed out of the house out of fear. Something told me that if I stayed in there, bad things would happen. The noise in the house got the neighbors to call the cops. When they arrived, they just saw me standing outside, crying. "Hey kid, are you okay?" I tried to tell them what happened, but I was too terrified to make up a full sentence, so I just led them into the house to see for themselves. Interestingly, everything went off as soon as the cops stepped inside. One of the cops said he had never seen things like that before. "Noob," the other cop replied. I guess he was used to supernatural events because people here in my country are quite superstitious. The police took me to the hospital to find my mom and told her what happened. After that, my parents sold the house and moved to another village. My siblings were fine though, they just slept through everything. Lucky them. If you made it to the end of the video, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share, and we will see you in the next video.